and welcome back to Good Nightmare, a podcast where we talk about the darker side of life, and in this case, of death. This case is a little different to what I usually cover in terms of it not necessarily being a crime and not being a fairy tale, but it is grim and rather interesting. Poe is a name as easily recognised as Grimm, Shakespeare or King. His works are often easily recognisable as well, with one of the most infamous stories being The Raven and another being The Telltale Heart. Poe was a writer, editor and a critic. He wrote stories of the macabre, from insanity to murder, and usually both. He is credited with being a staple in the invention of the detective story and of science fiction, and was the first well-known American writer to attempt to earn his living solely through his short stories and poetry. Just as would be expected, it was not an easy life. Just before we get into the crux of this episode, and I won't take up too much of your time, but I want to offer you guys 15% off at Studio Sweden using the code GoodNightmare15. I've recently started using the Vasa Blah earphones, and I can guarantee you I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, though I did try to find a translation. They have 8 hours of unlimited playtime with a unique standby mode for up to 10 days of battery life. So you won't have to worry about being connected to your phone 24/7, which is perfect for me as I often find myself accidentally ripping my earbuds out of my ears. These earbuds are light, comfortable and subtle, so you can listen to your favourite music or podcasts at work or wherever you might be. So remember to use GoodNightmare15 on checkout for 15% off. In 1809, Edgar Poe was born. He was the second child of his parents. Their relationship and one of their lives was not to last. Poe's father left the family in 1810, and his mother passed away shortly after in 1811 of pulmonary tuberculosis, also known as consumption. This left Edgar and his sibling orphaned. Edgar was taken in by John and Frances Allan. This is where he got his second name, Edgar Allan Poe. Though they never officially adopted the young boy, they raised him well into young adulthood. Their home life became turbulent when Edgar was entering into further education. Money was already tight due to gambling, and the funds for his education were overwhelming. Poe only attended the University of Virginia for 1 year before he had to leave. Poe went on to enlist in the army under a pseudonym. However, he knew early that he wanted to work solely as a writer, so he had to end his military career. To do this, Poe had himself intentionally court-martialed, knowing that he would be found guilty and subsequently dismissed. His charges were neglect of duty and disobedience of orders. Poe published his first works, Tamerlane and Other Poems, in 1827, and thus began his writing career. In 1830, John Allan, Poe's adoptive father, married his second wife, Louisa Patterson. The relationship was unsettled, and the pair would often argue over the children that Allan had had as a result of his affairs. This unfortunately led to Poe being abandoned by his adoptive father. In terms of Poe's writing career, he began writing poetry, which soon moved to prose when he found himself struggling to make a living. He submitted stories to several publications and in 1833 won an award for his story, Message Found in a Bottle. This story was about a man lost at sea and carried to the South Pole by a hurricane. When he found himself aboard a new ship, he was unable to make use of the maps and the tools, as they all seemed to be broken or malfunctioning. He wasn't able to be seen by the elderly crewmen that were travelling with him. The seemingly invisible man stole writing materials from the captain and started a journal which he then threw into the sea. The story ended when the ship approached Antarctica and was caught in a whirlpool where it began to sink. This story in particular definitely has that science fiction flair. In 1835, Poe found himself working as an assistant editor for the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. He was fired shortly after gaining employment when his boss caught him drunk on the job. Though, with promising behaviour, he was hired on once again, a courtesy none of us would probably ever be shown. The same year, Poe would marry his 13-year-old cousin. It sounds uncomfortable and immoral by today's standards, but this was generally quite normal back then. Poe was 26 at the time of the marriage. It's said that she may have been the inspiration for some of Poe's writing. Unfortunately, she passed away after 11 years of marriage. She had fallen victim to tuberculosis and experienced her first symptoms while playing the piano and singing. Poe had described the onset of symptoms as if a blood vessel broke in her throat. He began to drink more heavily in an attempt to cope with her impending death. As popular as Poe may be nowadays, he wasn't exactly the talk of the town back in his time. Poe actually alienated himself from the writing community. He accused another infamous author, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, author of Evangeline and The Divine Tragedy, of plagiarism. Longfellow took the high road and deigned not to respond. I couldn't find any particular details about how this accusation affected Poe's life, though as we'll come to see, many of his decisions may have been considered the wrong ones, or perhaps just ill-thought-out choices. Poe's instability and drinking only worsened after the death of his young wife. He attempted another relationship with a Miss Sarah Whitman, but it didn't survive because of his excessive drinking and unstable behaviour. He then went on to form a relationship with his childhood love, Sarah Royster. Before we come to the moment we've all been waiting for, the mysterious death of Edgar Allan Poe, I just want to remind you that I am currently able to offer you 15% off a Studio Sweden purchase using the code GoodNightmare15. When I found myself buying my 8th pair of headphones in the last 6 months, I knew that I had to switch to something more sustainable. Studio Sweden's Vasa Bla headphones are so light and comfortable I can work and listen to my favourite podcasts without worrying about sound dropping out or uncomfortable and clunky hardware. The designs are minimalist and stylish and really pretty, and the sound quality is fantastic. It's almost like sitting in the studio while your favourite show is being recorded. So remember to use the code GoodNightmare15 for 15% off your purchase at Studio Sweden, and let me know what you choose. Poe's erratic behaviour continued up to the moment of his death. On October 3rd, 1849, Poe was found on the streets in, quote, great distress and in need of immediate assistance. He was taken to the Washington Medical College and passed away on the 7th of October 1849 at 5 a.m. During his entire stay at the medical college, Poe was described as incoherent. No one could get a word out of him as to how he came to be in such a miserable state, wasted, dressed in another man's clothes, and left on the street alone. It's alleged that he repeatedly called the name Reynolds the night before he passed. And his famous last words? Lord help my poor soul. He was 40 years old. Poe's exact cause of death remains a mystery to this day, though some theories have been put forward, such as inflammation of the brain due to alcoholism, possible heart disease, epilepsy, and even syphilis or rabies. A theory arose in 1872 that Poe was forced to make a vote for a particular political candidate. This was not uncommon practice in turbulent times. certain unkind and prejudiced people would often get a victim into a mindless and vulnerable state, usually by forcing plenty of alcohol on them. They would then have this person vote for their preferred candidate. Cases like these often ended in violence or murder. Poe's death was officially ruled as phrenitis, swelling of the brain, which may be accurate, but it would be interesting to know the exact way that this came about. Smithsonian Mag.com goes into a little bit of further detail about some of the theories I've previously mentioned. I'll pop this link in the show notes for you if you'd like to have a quick read. If you're interested in further reading, John Evangelist Walsh, in his book Midnight Dreary, The Mysterious Death of Edgar Allan Poe, puts forward the theory that Poe was indeed murdered. I've put this on my reading list and would love to read along with some of you if you're interested. And of course, in this further reading segment, I have to recommend Poe's collection of work. Whether you enjoy his poetry or his prose and short stories, there's something in it for everyone. I myself have a collection of his works that I received as a teen, but I haven't really given myself the time to dive in head first. So if you have any recommendations as to what stories or poems I should focus on, let me know. As for my theory on his death, my logical side says it was a combination of alcoholism, mental illness, and perhaps violence. Though part of me does lean towards a politically fueled murder. Whether his death was accidental, I'm not too sure. And just before we wrap up the episode, a little fun fact, or I hope it's a fact. I was looking at some trivia about the life of Edgar Allan Poe, and I found a quote that said that he was quite fond of cats. Apparently, Poe would often write with a cat perched on his shoulder or just sitting nearby. This sounds like my ideal kind of writing session. Make sure to let me know your favourite poem or tale by Edgar Allan Poe, and your other favourite authors in a similar vein, and what theory catches your interest in regards to his death. You can catch me on Instagram or Twitter at goodnightmare_s, on Facebook at goodnightmarepod, or via email at goodnightmare_s@outlook.com. Until next time, sweet dreams.
This week we're discussing the case of the Grim Sleeper.
Tonight we are discussing the wrongful conviction of Richard Rosario.
We're going to talk about the disappearance of Evelyn Hernandez.
We will be discussing the case of the San Mateo slasher.
Dive into the disappearance of Sneha Phillip.
The wrongful conviction and near execution of Clarence Brantley.
Welcome to Misconduct, a true crime podcast. I'm Eileen, and with me as always is Colleen.
Join us every Thursday as we discuss resolved and unresolved crimes, wrongful convictions, and miscarriages of justice. Find out more at misconductpodcast.com.